Close your eyes and head back to a time when watching too much TV risked damaging your brain. Do you remember that fun summer? When you flew out of bed after hearing the brick radio alarm clock ring to fight for the right to watch Super Friends, and were subsequently kicked out of the house by your mother. Today, we are about to have the best summer day in the 1970s that everyone ever dreamed of. Before we begin, hit like and subscribe for more memories. Waking up early on Saturday morning was a sacred summer ritual. We usually jumped out of bed when it was still twilight, hearts pounding from the familiar race. Who would be the first to gain control of the TV in the living room? The TV back then only had 3 channels, and only 2 of them bothered to broadcast cartoons in the morning. So, the kids rushed down the stairs, slipping on the hardwood floor, running across the house as if competing in a speed race. Whoever got to the TV first had total choice, and our entire little world revolved around that. The hurried breakfast was usually just a bowl of sugary cereal, drenched in cold milk, eaten while eyes were glued to the screen. When images of Scooby-Doo or Super Friends appeared, the kids forgot everything else. Sometimes the whole family sat crowded together on the carpet, laughter erupting when Dastardly and Muttley played their foolish tricks. Each episode was a thrilling adventure, and in that moment, the world only consisted of cartoons and endless joy. But the biggest challenge wasn't who grabbed the TV first, but the old TV itself. It had no remote control. Every time we wanted to change the channel or adjust the volume, the kids had to get up and walk the long 8 steps to turn the knob. To us, that was a small ordeal, especially when neighboring Timmy boasted that his house had just gotten a modern TV with a remote control. We were both envious and resentful, but we still clung to our old machine, because it was the center of an entire childhood world. Saturday morning could not be separated from Friday night. The night before, the group gathered around the screen to watch Saturday Night Live. The living room lights were on, the kids sat huddled together, both excited and sneaky, because they knew the adults would scold them if they were too loud. When John Belushi or Dan Aykroyd appeared, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. No one dared to miss a single line. The very next morning, those lines became the kids' secret language, repeated nonstop on the playground, in the classroom hallway, and even during class, making teachers frown. In a world that never knew reruns or YouTube, missing an episode of SNL meant being excluded from the conversation circle on Monday. After a few hours immersed in the dazzling world of cartoons and endless antics, the living room door burst open. Mom walked in, her hair still full of rollers, her apron stained with various smudges like a brown map. She didn't say much, just reached out and abruptly turned off the glowing box that was making us roar with laughter. And then, the immortal mantra echoed, almost becoming part of the daily ritual. Go outside, kids. Stop sitting inside and rotting your brains. The neighborhood was safe enough back then that every kid could run wild from the front yard to the empty lot without anyone worrying. No mobile phones, no GPS, and no tracking apps. Just a booming final call in the late afternoon was enough to gather the entire gang home. We absolutely never dared to complain. I have nothing to do. Because if we were foolish enough to say it, an endless list of chores would instantly appear, mopping the floor, washing dishes, or worst of all, pulling weeds in the garden under the sweltering sun. Therefore, the kids learned to shut up and act quickly. We quickly slipped on our worn-out Converse shoes, threw on our favorite Godzilla-printed t-shirt, and vanished from the house faster than a police siren in a movie. Outside, the whole world of freedom awaited. There were no schedules, no continuous adult supervision, and no video games to keep us confined. It was this parental leniency that created a generation of children who had to manage themselves, sometimes resolving conflicts, sometimes inventing new games, or simply finding ways to kill time without being discovered as bored. Looking back, it was those summer days of being kicked out that taught us more than any textbook lesson. If you grew up in the 1970s, your most essential and important possession wasn't a smartphone or a video game system, but your bicycle. It was the ticket to go anywhere, exploring the neighborhood or town, and undertaking adventures without having to rely on parents for rides. The bicycle was the ultimate transportation, often leaned against the garage wall if it wasn't lying, sprawled out in the yard from the day before. It provided a sense of independence that children today rarely experience, where kids' playdates are often supervised. The bicycles of that era typically featured high-rise handlebars and a banana seat. The lucky and wealthy kids rode the famous Schwinn Stingray, considered the gold standard for that type of banana bike. For kids whose parents weren't as affluent, we were still proud of our Huffy bought from Kmart or the Free Spirit from Sears. Regardless of the type, we were attached to our bikes, riding them as far as we could. Throughout that long, drawn-out summer, these Huffies and Free Spirits covered countless miles. The sound that signaled summer's arrival wasn't music, but the sound of a baseball card stuck in the spokes of the wheel. That distinctive scrunch noise made us feel like we were riding a brand new Harley. The simplicity of the plastic big wheel tricycle, considered the Ferrari for the under 10 crowd, also brought equal excitement. Your bicycle was the key to escaping boredom, the vehicle you used to go from house to house, going to the front door and asking, "Can Adam come out and play?" If the answer was no, you moved on to the next house because traffic was never an issue. The combination of the freedom offered by the bike and the feeling of safety in the neighborhood allowed us to learn how to confidently navigate the world independently. These bikes endured countless falls and crashes with homemade bike ramps, but they always bounced back, ready for the next adventure just like their riders. The playgrounds of the 70s were entirely different from today's safe plastic playgrounds, with easy-to-climb stairs and safe curved slides. Playgrounds were made of metal and rust, encouraging climbing and challenges. Most of this equipment had been around for a while, meaning the colored lead paint often chipped off, revealing more rust than was inside your Partridge Family lunchbox. Danger was an inherent factor, and we learned to assess risk independently without adult intervention. The steel slide was an unforgettable symbol, but also a real threat during the summer. The steep, slippery steel surface of the slide could heat up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, about 60 degrees Celsius, under the scorching sun. If you happened to be wearing shorts, which you certainly would because it was summer, you would instantly receive searing burns on your legs. One slide down could leave scorch marks on your thighs, but that was the price of surviving a day of play. As in a story I experienced, when cornered on the climbing frame, my only option was to launch myself down that white, lava-hot slide. Another favorite piece of equipment was the merry-go-round. You secured a spot on the metal platform, and before long, the older kids would spin it so fast you were guaranteed to fly off. That feeling of dizziness and danger was part of the fun. And we can't forget the rocket ship slide. These multi-tiered structures, often painted red, white, and blue, not only ignited the imagination but also inspired patriotism. The playground was where we self-governed, where rules were set by the older kids, and where we learned bravery and how to take responsibility for our bruises. Every kid growing up in the 70s was obsessed with Evel Knievel. We grew up watching Knievel jump over cars, buses, canyons, and fountains. We had the wind-up Evel Knievel bicycle toy. Even as toddlers, we tried to perform jumps with our big wheels. Summer was the time when every kid built a bike ramp. The materials were simple. All you needed was a wooden plank and something to prop it up on, usually bricks, a cinder block, or simply other pieces of wood. The simplicity of the materials contrasted with the complexity and danger of the challenge. The challenge started with jumping over your friends' bikes. Then it escalated to jumping over your friends themselves. Each successful jump was a small victory, an affirmation of our audacity. Our parents were generally not overly concerned about these dangerous antics, and this is the biggest difference compared to today. If they did tell us to stop, it was usually just to run and grab the camera. Those photos were evidence of our boldness and adventurous spirit, captured by adults who cheered us on to challenge our limits. We learned that failure was part of the testing process, and a fall was just the beginning of the next attempt, reinforcing the confidence to navigate the world on our own. We didn't need cheers, just a wooden plank, and a little bit of Knievel madness in our veins. After watching Knievel perform impossible stunts, we felt inspired to push our own physical limits, regardless of whether our rattling Huffy or Free Spirit bikes were designed for it. On super hot days when cicadas chirped incessantly and sweat streamed down your back, nothing was better than swimming. Although water parks with multi-story slides are ubiquitous today, for most kids in the 70s, the best option for cooling down was the community pool. At the pool, you would meet friends from school and maybe even the girls you wanted to impress by splashing them or performing somersaulting cannonballs off the diving board. Showing off these perfect jumps was an important form of social competition. 70s public pools had something rarely seen today: the high dive board. Climbing the ladder of the high dive was not an easy decision. As soon as you climbed a few steps, you were locked in by a long line of children climbing up behind you. This meant that once you reached the top, there was only one way down, because your friends would never let you live it down if you backed out. Moreover, one of the girls might be watching you, adding extra pressure to be brave. For kids living in rural areas, they had fishing holes, woods, and even abandoned barns to explore. There would often be a pond or lake with a sketchy rope tied to a tree, allowing you to swing and jump into the water. You probably needed to wear shoes to avoid broken glass underwater, but that inconvenience was nothing compared to the joy of instant cooling. And when back on your bike under the warm sun, you would be dry before you got home for dinner. Nowadays, water slides are only found at tourist spots, and they were just concrete troughs dug into hillsides coated with layers of lead paint. Thus, the community pool was our only paradise. It seems that every construction project children undertake today is done through the video game Minecraft. But back in the 70s, we built everything in real life. Summer was the time for creating makeshift things where creativity was limited by your ingenuity and ability to find materials. As long as we had a handsaw, a hammer, and nails, we could build anything we wanted. We built forts in the backyard, tree houses in the woods, and rattling wooden go-karts. These rattling vehicles were usually steered by a rope tied to both sides of the front axle. And the one thing kids never thought of installing on them was brakes, turning every downhill trip into a life-or-death race, requiring quick reflexes and extraordinary courage. Thanks to all the new construction happening at the time, finding wood was never a problem. Scraps of wood and discarded cinder blocks were endless resources for these young architects. These structures were both places for play and secret headquarters, where kids held meetings, planned adventures, and asserted ownership over a small corner of the world. Besides entertainment, they were also a process of learning about mechanics, balance, and teamwork, all happening without adult supervision. The kids learned to solve problems through trial and error, strengthening the confidence to navigate the world on their own. This freedom to build reflected the lack of parental supervision, allowing the kids to develop independence and practical problem-solving skills. Do you remember the riskiest thing you ever did at the playground? Comment below. For us, breakfast was a sugar shock waiting to happen. When waking up on Saturday morning, the first thing was to rush out of bed, feet barely touching the brown and yellow shag carpet, to race for control of the TV. I can still hear the distinctive crunch of Captain Crunch, and the feeling of it scraping the roof of your mouth, an enjoyable pain. That crunch was the most familiar sound of a hurried breakfast. The sweet aroma of Pop-Tarts being heated in the toaster was another sign of summer morning luxury. Often, the kids didn't have time to be responsible. I quickly poured the rest of the crunchy cereal into the bowl and stuffed the box back into the cupboard, hoping Mom was too busy with the upcoming BBQ to notice my irresponsible actions. Breakfast was a race, not a quiet meal, because the kids needed enough sugar energy to sustain the most important event: Saturday morning cartoons. This combination of sugar and starch was the fuel for hours spent glued to the antique TV screen. The absence of strict dietary rules at the time allowed this sugar explosion to become an indispensable summer ritual. Even choosing between Pop-Tarts and Captain Crunch was a strategic decision, because the kids needed to maximize their sugar intake in the shortest time possible before Mom found out and forced them outside. Furthermore, TV dinners were like hitting the jackpot. The small aluminum trays with perfectly separated compartments made every meal feel like an event. Salisbury steak night was the best, even if no one really knew what Salisbury steak was. During a summer full of relentless, reckless adventures under the intense heat, what was the most common and accessible mechanism for quenching thirst? It was drinking water directly from the hose on the side of the house. The water flowing out of that winding green snake was as cool and refreshing as any drink the kids ever tasted. It carried a characteristic rubbery smell and a hint of damp earth, a flavor that children today can never understand. It was a fundamental experience. No glass needed, no permission required. However, if the kids needed something with a more intense color, then Kool-Aid is the #1 choice. The appearance of the Kool-Aid guy was the moment when every child paused their activity. With his legendary, "Oh yeah," this guy seemed to be the savior of every summer party. But honestly, the Kool-Aid guy was too busy to go everywhere in the 70s. The kids knew that asking an adult to mix Kool-Aid was a big request, and often they would refuse. Therefore, the final and most frequent solution remained drinking water from the hose, considering it the last resort. Even when Kool-Aid was available, its strong artificial flavor, often accompanied by colorful plastic cups, still couldn't replace the raw, original cool feeling of the strong stream of water from the garden hose. The feeling of that sudden coldness rushing straight down the throat after an afternoon of racing and playing tag in the sun is something no cold bottled water can replicate. The crackle of burning charcoal and the appealing aroma of burgers and hot dogs filling the air were the unmistakable signs that summer dinner had arrived. This was one of the rare relaxing family moments when the kids saw Dad grilling meat, a can of Miller Lite in hand. Dad might even share a sip of beer with you, making you feel older. Helping Dad flip the burgers was fun at first. It was an honor to stand next to him, but the excitement quickly disappeared when you saw the other kids playing under the sprinkler, and your dad was drinking beer without having to be responsible. You quickly abandoned the spatula to rush into the fun. Afterwards, the kids would eat 1 burger and maybe 3 hot dogs, setting a personal record. TV dinners were like hitting the jackpot. The small aluminum trays with perfectly separated compartments made every meal feel like an event. Salisbury steak night was the best, even if no one really knew what Salisbury steak was. Another special dish of Mom's was hamburger surprise, which was basically hamburger helper, mixed with any vegetables that needed rescuing from the crisper drawer. The whole house would be filled with the smell of onions and garlic, mixed with the scent of chocolate chips baking in the air. Grilling dinner was an expression of Dad's relaxation, the crackling music emanating from the record player, and the sense of community as all the neighbors started showing up to join the fun. Is there a memory from those old summers that still impresses you today? We really look forward to hearing your story. No church basement potluck or any neighborhood gathering was complete without the wobbly masterpieces of Jell-O. Jell-O was the undisputed queen of summer parties. Aunt Betty was famous for her lime green Jell-O with shredded carrots suspended inside like orange confetti. Not exactly in a good way, but it was a memorable creation. The artificial green color contrasted with the orange of the carrots, creating a bizarre visual mix. But Mrs. Johnson across the street was the undisputed Jell-O queen. Her masterpiece of layered rainbow Jell-O would arrive, wobbling majestically on her nicest serving platter, each layer perfectly delineated. Getting it out of the mold required the careful precision of disarming a bomb. Just one wrong move, and your hours-long masterpiece would turn into colorful fruit soup. Jell-O was not just dessert. It was an art form, a symbol of the meticulousness and pride of the 70s homemakers. They dedicated time and patience to create perfect layers, a culinary achievement of that era. Even less skilled mothers tried with sparkling copper molds, hoping a miracle would happen when they flipped the mold upside down. Friday nights were for going to the drive-in movie theater. That was our paradise, a communal cinematic experience, unlike any modern movie theater. We performed the ritual. Dad backed the station wagon into position, flipped down the tailgate, and we created a cozy nest with blankets and pillows. The back seat became our private living room, warm and smelling of the night air. The metal speaker hanging on the window was like a talkative robot, emitting crackling, static-filled dialogue that we had to fill in ourselves. We sat inside, watching the stars flicker in the sky while massive images moved on the distant screen. The best part was the brief adventure to the snack bar between films. We navigated the labyrinth of cars, following the bright lights of the cartoon hot dog image on the big screen. The snack bar was a world unto itself, where the smell of popcorn and hot dogs mingled with the commotion of the crowd, a journey full of excitement. Sometimes I pretended to fall asleep during the second movie just so Dad would carry me back to the car. I woke up when Dad placed me down, back into the absolute safety of the wagon, pretending to sleep to prolong that moment of being cared for. That was a little trick we used to extend the closeness and feeling of Dad's protection. At one point, we only played with basic toys. Then, Star Wars landed in our world like a meteor. During the opening scene in the movie theater, you could hear Jaws dropping all across America as the Star Destroyer kept looming forward, seemingly never ending. Everything changed. Kids transitioned from playing with basic toys to using wrapping paper tubes as lightsabers. We generated the characteristic whoosh-whoosh sound, fighting in every corner of the house, every backyard. Arguments broke out over who got to be Han Solo, that imperfect hero character, an endless debate. Our summer challenge then was continuously trying to use the Force to retrieve cookies from the kitchen or cause trouble for our siblings. Star Wars, along with Rocky, were the best movies of the 70s. The power of the Force was not limited to games. It became a belief, a social science experiment that we desperately repeated to prove its existence. Although most people failed to move anything with their minds, the yearning to be part of that galaxy far, far away dominated our imagination all summer long. The arrival of Star Wars reshaped our adventures, replacing traditional cowboy games with intergalactic battles and transforming ordinary backyards into perilous alien planets. Rock'em Sock'em robots lived on our coffee tables all summer long in '76. It wasn't just a game, it was a tournament, a battle for supremacy in the living room. The sweet plastic smell when you first opened the box, an aroma that promised competition. The satisfying chunk-chunk sound of the controller, which required coordination and precise timing. And then the glorious crack when you delivered the perfect uppercut, knocking the opponent's head off. You probably remember having epic tournaments with your brother or sister, accompanied by loud sports commentary and proud victory dances. We were completely engrossed in the roles of boxers and commentators, to the extent that Mom finally banned it to the basement after an overly intense final match ended in a real-life wrestling match between the two of us. The red robot and the blue robot awakened our most basic competitive instincts. Besides the robots, Operation was also a game that tested composure and nerves. We focused around the crazy red-nosed patient, everyone holding their breath as someone tried to extract the wishbone. The alarm buzz sounded like a direct electric shock to the soul. But the real psychological torture came when the batteries started to weaken, producing a dying rzzt sound, even scarier than the full alarm. We became amateur surgeons, developing steady hands and nerves of steel. When the sun slowly sank below the horizon, our small neighborhood seemed to awaken with a new energy. No one was constrained by clocks or plans. Summer evenings were when the world opened up, where every alley, lawn, and garden corner could turn into an endless playground. Our favorite games were always exciting chases like Kick the Can, Flashlight Tag, or Ghost in the Graveyard. Laughter echoed everywhere as the kids ran through dark gardens, hiding in the shadows, hearts pounding when hearing the footsteps of others approaching. Then came twilight. When moisture hung in the air and the wind seemed to stop, a small miracle appeared. The first bright spots began to flicker in the darkness. Those were the fireflies. Their sparkling light was like a familiar rendezvous, signaling the summer ritual that kids never missed. We rushed home to grab empty mason jars, the lids carefully punctured so the glowing prisoners could breathe. Some even brought butterfly nets, running around with eyes bright with determination. The whole group of kids engaged in an exciting hunt. Everyone wanted to collect as many as possible so their jar would be brighter than their friends. When captured, the light from the fireflies reflected on our faces, making everyone look like they were holding a small piece of the night sky in their hands. The kids called it the Firefly Lantern, shimmering and vague enough to feel like it could lead the way to another world. We cheered, compared our jars, proud to be the one who caught the most, then shared them so everyone had a bit of light. In that moment, the fireflies were like moving stars, the summer magic that kids believed would never fade. The entire lawn transformed into a miniature universe, where each mason jar was a small galaxy in our hands. If you could go back in time and relive one of these great summer experiences, what moment would it be? Share your memory in the comments below. In the 70s, communicating with friends wasn't a tap on a screen. You had to walk to their house, go to the front door, and ask if Adam could come out and play, or bravely face the wall-mounted rotary phone. You had to pray that their older sister wouldn't pick up and answer. The dialing process was slow, requiring patience, and if you dialed one number wrong, you had to start all over again. And pen pals. They were like prehistoric DMs. Each letter was a small treasure which could take weeks to arrive. The waiting time for a letter to arrive could extend for several weeks, sometimes even months, depending on the geographical distance. But its value was incomparable. That feeling of anticipation, waiting for the mailman every day, hoping to see an envelope with your friend's unfamiliar handwriting. Then the rush when opening the envelope, carefully unfolding the pages containing stories, thoughts, and scribbled pictures from a friend you had never met. It was a form of deep and genuine connection, where we had to put all our feelings and thoughts into every word. There were no emojis or GIFs. Everything was in the story you told, and how you expressed emotions through written words. Pen pals broadened our worldview, showing us different cultures, different lives, and diverse thoughts. This is also a part of connection we don't see much today, a memory of how we built relationships in a simpler, but equally rich world. When the final call home sounded, usually as the sun began to set and you watched the neighborhood group break up, you would trudge back. You returned home and collapsed onto your bed, completely exhausted. We were tired from games like Ghost in the Graveyard and Flashlight Tag, after running through dark backyards. The fresh night air streamed in through the open window. You drifted off to sleep with the constant sound of crickets chirping, interspersed by the occasional startling crack of the bug zapper. Sometimes you lay stretched out on the lawn, too tired to move another inch. The grass made your neck itch, but as you looked up at the dark clouds, you slowly drifted off to sleep. You didn't even realize when Dad picked you up and began carrying you to bed. I woke up as Dad set me down, back into absolute safety, but I pretended to sleep. We never felt that safe again. Those seemingly endless summer days would pass before we realized it. But they were wonderful while they lasted. The exhaustion at the end of the day was evidence of a music listening experience. They paved the way for the smaller cassette tape formats later on, but during their time, though small, they were the pinnacle of portable music convenience in the car. Let's cherish these precious memories together and pass them on to future generations. If these beautiful memories brought a smile to your face and evoked fond recollections, don't forget to hit the like and share buttons and subscribe to Back to Yesterday so you don't miss the next nostalgic journey. Thank you for watching.